Dink, fresh off a big blowout win. You got to go to that one. What was that like, and how you doing today?
Yeah, I mean, it was a party for Knicks fans in the stands. Very, very cool environment. I think the most energy I've ever felt in a stadium was the sequence where the Knicks got like 3 offensive rebounds, and then OG hit a three to put them up, I think like 41 at the time or something like that. And that was like the moment that the Knicks fans like really let it out, like that they had won the game. And it was a very wild environment, and it was a blowout that was good enough that I could leave early and avoid all the absolute chaos on 33rd and 7th. So that was amenable as well to my schedule. And then, yeah, game seven blowout with Denver and OKC is OKC kind of flexed their muscle defensively. So, kind of uninspiring ends to the series, but they were good series on the whole. And I'm excited to talk through the conference finals.
Yeah, we saw the Wolves kind of win comfortably. So kind of three of the four closeout games were like kind of handled strongly here. So let's start with the big game seven win, OKC, and they did it in OKC fashion. Their whole reason why they're so good, or the main reason I think, is their ability to force turnovers and dominate that side of the ball for creating their offense and taking away the opponent's offense as well. 37-7 points off turnovers edge there. That's the game for me. Like for this series, I think if Minnesota doesn't take care of the ball, like it's going to be real short. Obviously, the Wolves turned it over a little bit. Fifth most turnovers in the playoffs so far. We're a little bit sloppy in the Lakers series, tightened up a little bit. Not that great against the Warriors. You do turn it over a little bit there. So that's kind of the story. And then I think the other kind of macro trend of this is this: how much zone do we see? I think we see both these teams play a little bit of zone. We saw OKC get stymied at times. Obviously, the Wolves, they've had some spotty stuff with zone. Certainly that Bucks game comes to mind. But Austin, anything you're seeing here that jumps out for how maybe Minnesota could kind of tighten this gap? It's a big line. They're minus 390. The OKC Thunder is on the betting lines here. So what do you think Minnesota has to do to kind of hang around in the series?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's taking care of the ball is first and foremost. I do think that I mentioned this on a previous pod that if they do match up, OKC is a better suited to match up with OKC than some other teams, than most other teams, I would say. And I kind of agree with the line that like OKC should be favored, but like if you can take care of the ball, Minnesota has the defenders and sort of the personnel that they can build lineups where you can switch everything and not have a liability out there. Maybe there will be lineups that we might not see Conley or Gobert. We'll get into that later. And then they also have shooting, which is what you need to beat OKC. And like they could run a lineup with Randall and Nas at the 4-5, or just one at the 5, and then a bunch of shooters around them. And so Minnesota's really going to have to be able to, avoid tight spaces. Or I guess the way to beat OKC, because their defense is so good at shifting, isn't to avoid tight spaces, is to get in and back out as quickly as possible, right? So like draw the second defender, the third defender, but then quickly get it out before they force the turnover. And then OKC is really good at knowing their personnel. I think that's a big change between OKC this year and previous years. Is before they were just a heavy help defense. This year they're a heavy help, but they're really good at backside rotations and when not to backside rotate and just let that slot three, if it's not someone good, shoot that three. Which is why the importance of having 5 average or better shooters at all times against OKC is pretty important if you don't have someone in the dunker spot. So that's what I'm looking for. As far as OKC goes, a big development I think we saw at the end of the series was Caruso guarding Jokic and just Caruso guarding up. Like we know that with Chicago, Caruso played a lot of 4, but I think this level of like all of his matchups towards the end of this series was Aaron Gordon and Jokic, right? It was just the front court. And, we just saw Julius Randle go off in 2 series in a row. Like, can you think of I'm not sure I can think of a better matchup for Randle than Caruso with a bunch of swarming defenders. So I think it'll really be put to the test how much Randle's growth is real.
Yeah, that's a big part. Randall taking care of the ball and taking care of the ball a little bit. They were pretty spotty at times, as I mentioned off the top there. And then, the corner threes. Minnesota takes the 5th most corner threes. I think that's going to be a big thing. We'll talk about Nas Reed in a little bit here. But, yeah, Dink, anything you want to add on how Minnesota's offense could kind of get it going? That's kind of the story because I think, they're taking care of the ball, but how else could they kind of generate offense? Because it's going to be tough on ball for sure. Are they going to have enough shooting? Like anything you're noticing for how this team could generate points?
I think the thing that does work in their favor a bit is, as Austin alluded to, the ability to kind of space the floor with shooting kind of throughout. Gobert, the only really non-shooter in the rotation entirely, and that ability to generate 3-point volume is something that we saw tick up quite a bit for Denver, even against Oklahoma City. So Minnesota, a team that's willing to shoot threes and willing to shoot threes in volume. I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that. In addition, they have a lead scorer in Anthony Edwards who's willing to take pull-up threes as well, which I think is helpful just in terms of like loosening up the Oklahoma City defense a little bit. So I think they're going to have to take care of the ball, and I think they're going to have to shoot the three ball well. Those are the recipes for them to have a successful series. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the lineups play and how that impacts whether they play small or big, and kind of who is able to control on the rebounding side of things, because I think both teams have shown an ability to do that even against strong rebounding opponents. But I think ultimately, like, you're going to need to continue to have good decision-making series from Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards. And even if it's Julius Randle, like if you look at a lot of the regular season clips, I know Nekias Duncan was highlighting this on Twitter. He highlighted like 7 different post-up opportunities that Julius Randle had gotten in the regular season series. Those were all against smaller defenders. A lot of times it was, J-Dub, Dort, someone like that he was kind of able to body around and get good shots. I think it'll be much more challenging this time around, because I think, as Austin alluded to, you'll get more Alex Caruso. I wouldn't be surprised if they start with Hartenstein on Julius Randle, and then have Chet kind of being the help off Rudy Gobert, making Julius Randle have to make passes into tight windows around the basket, like something that all of Minnesota, except Mike Conley, is really uncomfortable doing. And I think that's one thing that OKC's defense is really going to be able to lean on, is helping off Gobert, because they know that Minnesota does not like to throw lobs to Gobert. They do not like to try to get the ball. They don't trust his hands. So I think ultimately Minnesota is going to have to try to get, as Austin alluded to, get down to the paint and get it out to the shooters, and then get OKC in rotation, then knock down shots. Like, I think that's their path to success in this one. Maybe there's a game or two that Anthony Edwards, offensively can kind of take over. I doubt it. Against this OKC defense, we saw Jamal Murray like really struggle to have 1 or 2 of those games in a 7-game series, and Jamal Murray's, been an exceptional isolation scorer in the postseason. So yeah, I think the 3-point shooting is going to be the barometer for Minnesota. If they're making a bunch of threes, if they get this series into a series of 3-point variance, I think that's good for them. What they need to avoid is getting this into a series of making twos, because I think if it's a series of making twos, I think OKC is turning the ball over and getting in transition and kind of taking control of things. So I like Minnesota's roster to be able to try to combat OKC. I think OKC is they got a softer opponent in round 1 with Memphis, but since then, I think these are the 2 toughest opponents that they could have faced for what they would be dealing with in the playoffs. So I think it's a very legitimate run that they're having to go through in the gauntlet of the Western Conference here.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if they use Rudy Gobert as a screener. I talked about that a lot last week. He had his screen assists went like way down. They weren't using him in actions, so I think if that's not effective, it could definitely see him kind of like get cut down. But just going to the other side of the ball really quick too before we talk player stuff. Minnesota's defense has been really good. Their pick and roll defense has been excellent in the playoffs against teams who have run it pretty well. But I think one big advantage that kind of is like twofold is OKC's ability to get in transition. They're 17% of their possessions in the playoffs have been in transition versus 10.9 for their opponents. It's such a gap when they're playing against the Nuggets, first in fast break points, Memphis first in transition frequency. Like, that's such an edge to me there. But obviously they've got a lot of length. Austin, how do you think that OKC's offense kind of generates in the half court? So I think they are going to be able to get some transition, but overall in the half court against a really good half court defense, do you think it's going to be more of a shade-driven offense, or kind of, should note too, J-Dub finally woke up, had a really bad series and had a really good game 7. So overall, who's the heavy burden on for OKC's offense?
Yeah, both of these teams, or teams that in all of their previous matchups this playoffs, like, were generating far better looks than their opponents, which that's why they're where they are. I think that in this series, if there's optimism for Minnesota, is that I think they will win the look battle. Like, I think that they will get better looks than OKC will this series. The problem is that the looks that Minnesota likes to force, I don't think OKC is going to put pressure on to change. It's just that OKC has the players that they, like Shea and Jada, pull up midi, like, they're fine with that, right? Like, the quality of look, quote unquote, is going to be better for Minnesota, but the guys taking that quote unquote tougher look for OKC are the type of players that can beat that defense. Sort of the not helping off in drop coverage with some long defender right behind them. Like that's Shea and that's J-Dub. So, you can make an argument either way. You could say Minnesota's getting the better looks, or you can say that OKC has the type of personnel that they're perfectly okay funneling those shots. But I do think though OKC is a low volume 3-point attempt team, they're generally a higher percentage, and I think Minnesota will take a lot of that away. And then I think both teams are good at can take away transition from the other side. So I do think there'll be more half court possessions. Assuming that Minnesota takes care of the ball. And so I do think that it'll be a heavy Shea and J-Dub series. Not just because they're the two best scorers, but because I think that's just the way it's going to funnel for both sides. And we haven't seen Minnesota really compromise their defense much. It's possible that Finch pulls things out if Shea's consistently beating them and goes to leave like a Dort or someone. But at least early in the series, I kind of expect it to be played pretty straight as far as you would expect based on the regular season, and then we'll adjust from there. So I guess we'll talk on next pod and see sort of like, did Shea drop a 45 ball on Minnesota? And if the answer is no, then I think it's going to be sort of the way Minnesota's been defending. But I don't know if you guys have different thoughts.
Yeah, Dink, what do you think on that situation?
It's one of the things that I'm most interested in seeing Finch make a decision on, because ultimately with Minnesota, they are so confident in their individual defenders, and rightly so, that they just don't help. And they're like, we're not going to let 3-point variance going to get the best of us because we think we're the better team and we can grind you down this way. I'm interested to see if a decision is made without Shea doing a lot of damage. And even with what we have seen now in these series that OKC has been vulnerable to losing is we've seen there are guys who are like above average 3-point shooters in the regular season don't shoot the ball that well in the playoffs, specifically Lou Dort. And we saw this last year against Dallas. Dallas was just like, yeah, Lou Dort, take as many as you'd like. Denver was like, Lou Dort, take as many as you'd like. I'm interested to see if Minnesota is like, well, we'd kind of like to turn this into a little bit more of a 3-point variance game and see if prove it Lou Dort and try to get Lou Dort off the floor, because Lou Dort is also an issue on the other end of the floor, as the best potential defender to deal with Anthony Edwards from a size perspective as well. So that's something I'm interested in. Chris Finch, they have been very steadfast in this. They do not like to help. So I'm very interested to see if they kind of make that decision as just a way, also try to bring more ball pressure, try to force turnovers, try to just ramp up the variance a little bit by getting yourself into rotation. Like Austin, I don't think they'll do that from the get-go. I'd be surprised if they did, just because they've been so consistent with this over the last couple of years. But it is something that I'm interested in seeing just generally, because I think when teams have had success against OKC in the playoffs, in a lot of ways, it's by kind of letting the OKC secondary shooters shoot volume and keeping the game kind of out of transition. That's been kind of the recipe. So I'm interested to see if Minnesota chooses to shift a little bit more help coverage towards the mid-range and try to let the shooters of OKC prove themselves and make Minnesota get back into their base coverages.
Can I add one more point on that?
Good. You're good.
Is that I think a lot of talking heads love to sort of analyze the situation and be like, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they help here? And I think an underrated point is that these players in these defenses, sure, they're malleable to some point, but they've been practicing and defending a certain way all season. And so, what makes Miami and Houston special is that their players are all used to a bunch of different coverages, and that, Ime or Spoelstra can just call it out and they can do it. But if you've been playing only one way all season and you're not practicing different rotations, it's really hard to I'm sure OKC spends so much time, or Houston spends so much time with knowing your personnel, knowing who to leave and when to leave, and they have reps doing that. And I guess I'm a little skeptical. Minnesota, all of their players are used to defending one way, and so without you can say we can change this, but sometimes we see in practice it doesn't always work that way immediately if that's not something that you're used to. And something that I think of is last year and 2 years ago, Indiana would not stray from their defense. And then when they played Milwaukee in the regular season, Giannis started he had a couple 50 balls, and they tried to double him and it didn't work because they were just getting wide open threes. Whereas this year they started, being a little more flexible with that throughout the regular season. And then they faced Giannis in the playoffs, and I thought they did a much better job of knowing there's an art to helping. It's not just always leave. It's knowing when to attack, when to dig, when to recover, who to recover from, who to rotate, and who to leave. And so I think my one caveat is if Minnesota does do this, like how effective will it be?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just pulling back to rotation stuff, we saw the Thunder tighten it up in Game 7. So do you think they kind of like start tight, or do they kind of go back to bringing 10 guys in and then kind of?
I think they start loose. I think that's the path of most series generally, right? Is you start loose, you experiment, you try to figure out like what looks are working, and then you tighten up as you kind of go. On top of that, Mark Dagnall is a guy who likes to play as many guys as possible, just generally. So I think they'll start on the looser side of things. I think it will be interesting. Obviously Jay Will became a big part of this series, or in the middle part of the series, then got de-emphasized in Game 7 in favor of Caruso. Not as striking or glaring of a need for Jay Will in this type of series. So I'm interested to see if Isaiah Joe's opportunities are kind of brought more to the forefront. That's one where against Minnesota you would think not, because of how Minnesota typically does not help off and does not really leave guys, and that doesn't leave like great opportunities for Isaiah Joseph. But then maybe it's Aaron Wiggins that's getting a little bit more opportunity in that second unit. I'm interested to see. They clearly, as Winky had alluded to in our private slacks, they clearly had been saving Caruso for bigger moments, right? Like they even during the course of the 7-game series against Denver, it was like clear, like, okay, break glass in case of emergency. I'm wondering if they start using that a little bit more frequently, kind of early on. Obviously, defensively, he is just such an incredible disruptor. But I'm thinking that it's going to start as experimentation and a little bit deeper out, and then work its way more condensed, but I think it might work its way more condensed a little bit quicker than the Denver series did, in part because I think it's going to be a little bit clearer which options are just like not on the table in the same way. Like Jokic is just such a unique problem to try to solve that you want to throw a bunch of different things at him to see what sticks. I don't see Minnesota as that unique of a problem to try to solve. So I think it'll be a little bit more clear which pieces to condense on as the series goes.
Yeah, definitely think Jay Will's a guy who could get de-emphasized because it's just a different necessity for how you use him there. But yeah, Austin, do you? I pretty much agree with Dink. Do you have anything thoughts there? And then we could kind of talk about Mike Conley. We talk about taking care of the ball. We know Chris Finch, whenever he wants to take care of the ball, he likes to play Mike Conley. So anything you want to add on OKC, and then we could get into how Minnesota kind of plays it with their guards. And then we talked about the Rudy Gobert Nasri dynamic.
Yeah, I agree with almost everything Drew said. I agree that they're going to expand again, and I agree that Isaiah Joe doesn't seem like a great fit for this matchup. I guess for that reason, like I'm not as convinced Jay Will is going to be de-emphasized just because Isaiah Joe seems like the first guy out if I were to choose one. Another kind of long shot in the Julian Strawther sweepstakes I would mention for this series is I think Kenrich Williams is a little interesting, just because he can guard up. And like, sure, Denver has Jokic, but they're not like mega big everywhere throughout. And neither, Memphis isn't huge either. Like I know they have Edie, but like Minnesota has Gobert, but they also are big 2 through 5. Like you have Ant and Jaden, and you have Randall. And so like Kenrich is more size than is in their rotation normally, and he can shoot the 3. So like if you played him at the small ball 5, like it's an interesting matchup against someone like Gobert to stretch him out, and Gobert's not going to punish him. So I do think that if I was Dagnall, I would at least try Kenrich in game 1 just to see what it looks like. But otherwise, generally agree it'll be big rotation, and Dagnall might not even know yet who will be in his game 2 rotation before game 1 ends.
And then how does the Minnesota thing shake out here with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Mike Conley? I thought Mike Conley was really important in the last series. I think he's going to be big again here. So how do you see that? And we talked a little bit about Rudy, but if you want to touch on that a little bit more, Austin.
Yeah. So I think we kind of nailed the Mike Conley stuff the first 2 series in terms of like he's not that important for against the Lakers when you can already break down their defense. They don't force turnovers. And he's going to get targeted on the other end. And I think we were pretty good about that. And then we said that he's important in the Warriors series, and it kind of took a couple games, but that came to fruition. And then this series is interesting because it's kind of a blend where like he is important on offense, but OKC is a team that will target him on defense. So then, as opposed to the last 2 series where it's very black and white to me, I think this is very much like a trade-off thing. How much do you need him on the offensive end, and how much can you hide him on the defensive end? And I think that'll be sort of a push and pull where when they're up, Conley might get cut in the game. And when they're down, they might need to just, we need, like, there's going to be a time where he's going to get targeted and they're going to pull him. And then, OKC is going to go on their like run of steals where they just steal the ball 3 times in 5 possessions, and Minnesota calls timeout, and Finch look down the bench and say, like, Mike, we need you back in there. So I think it'll be very much a push and pull. One of our other members in Slack mentioned Rudy, they thought could get more minutes. I'm not sure that I agree. Just like OKC doesn't take that many shots at the rim. Like, it's a lot of like mid-range stuff that like Rudy just won't have that much of an impact on. And like OKC used to be really susceptible to offensive rebounds, but ever since Chet's come back and Harden, like ever since they've been played double big, like that's not really been an issue. Like, we didn't even see Jokic punish them on the offensive glass as much as I kind of thought he might. So then it becomes like, okay, well, are the positives that Rudy is providing outweighing the negatives? And I'm actually a pretty good Rudy defender. Like, he has a very negative perception among casual fans. I think Rudy Gobert is a very talented and very valuable player, but in this matchup, like, it's hard to really say that his positives are outweighing his negatives. I don't know if you guys agree or not, but
I'm pretty much with you, but I'll let you guys first think.
Yeah, I actually, one note that I'll push back on Austin. I actually think they might play Conley more when they're playing from ahead than when they're playing from behind, because I think the perspective for them with Conley is, okay, if we're playing from ahead, just let's not turn the ball over. Like, let's just protect offensive possessions, because the biggest way to keep our leads, if they're targeting them on the other end for 2s and we're playing from ahead, okay, fine. But let's not let them get the easy stuff. Let's not let them get in transition. And if they're playing from behind, I think that's where you might see more Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Dante DiVincenzo try to get 3-point kind of variance kind of on your side, try to wreak havoc a little bit, more aggressive defensive coverages that could potentially lead to turnovers and different things like that. But on the Gobert note, I'm in agreement with Austin that I really don't think I think this is the worst matchup that there could be for Rudy Gobert in the league, because of the de-emphasis. Like, all the shots that OKC like largely gets at the rim are via transition. In the half court, they don't get quite as many shots at the rim, especially not that many contested shots at the rim. And so I don't see he adds a lot of value there. You talk about him like getting isolated on the perimeter, and he does a great job just generally getting isolated out onto the guards, I know, despite the Luka highlights and whatnot. But offensively, I don't think you can afford against OKC's defense to have a 0 out there. And that's my biggest concern for Rudy, is throughout the playoffs, outside of Game 5 against the Lakers, where he just dominated the offensive boards, haven't been a lot of great offensive performances from Rudy Gobert, in part because he hasn't caught the ball confidently. He hasn't kind of the timing and the pacing of lobs and pick and rolls hasn't been really great. He's really got that timing and pacing mostly with Mike Conley, who's the ball's not in his hands as much in the postseason. It's more in Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle's hands. So my concern is Rudy Gobert on the offensive end ends up leading to a lot of the turnovers and a lot of the problems that you're trying to avoid desperately against OKC, because they appear to look open at times and then becomes tight window passes really quickly that he doesn't have great hands at bringing down or putting up effectively. In often cases, he brings it down too often and the ball gets stripped. So that's my concern with Rudy Gobert, is just I don't know how much he adds. He adds something defensively clearly above, Naz Reid. But I think it's lost what value he brings defensively on the offensive end, where I think the one thing that if you're Minnesota, you're just like, our kryptonite is turnovers. I think when Rudy's on the floor, I think against this OKC defense, the turnover rate, I would expect it to go up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we need to adjust our DVPs to 1 steal per possession if it's going to be Rudy Gobert post-ups versus OKC defense.
Yeah, for sure. And then do you think we saw a little Jalen Clark? Obviously, this was during the season series. That was in the stretch they missed Dante and Naz, but he was guarding SGA and had a couple pretty good games. Do you think that we get like any wild cards? Like you talked about Cambridge. Do you think we could see like Jalen Clark or Terrence Shannon for some shot making? Do you think there's anything on that side, Austin, we might see that's a little bit surprising?
I kind of like the Jalen Clark shout out if they trust his 3-ball. The one thing I'll say about OKC is we mentioned you need shooting, but specifically you need like fast trigger shooting, because like OKC is susceptible, but they recover. Like they will leave you 12 feet of space, but they recover so fast. And so That's why we thought Kennard might be a decent fit versus OKC. Like, it's not just a 40% shooter. It has to be somebody that can get it off quick. And so I don't know how much Jalen Clark might provide some theoretical spacing, and that she's shooting 43% from three this year, but it's limited volume and it's not like a super quick trigger. Like, I don't know necessarily whether that will be the answer, but I think it's worth trying because, like you said, the defense is important, and like he theoretically can space the floor. I don't think it's Dillingham, even though like out of the three of Dillingham, Shannon, and Clark, he's like the one that has been the most in the rotation among the three in the regular season. I don't think that's what they need here. So I think it would be Clark followed by Shannon if it was someone. The other one I wanted to mention is Dante DiVincenzo. Obviously he'll be in the rotation, but like, man, it is so nice to have, I criticized the trade that I thought Cat was a lot better than Randall, but like, man, is it nice to have Dante for this series. Like, he's the guy that can shoot from deep, he can movement shoot, and he has a quick trigger. Like, he could be the guy that kind of like leads Minnesota in 3-point attempts, or leads the series in 3-point attempts. And like, he's kind of got a good size and defensive skill set to defend a lot of these OKC, isolation scores. So I'm looking for Dante to have a really big series.
So do you think that's going to be more at the expense of straight Rudy, or do you think it's going to be more of getting cut Nikhil, Conley? Like, do we see, basically I'm asking, do we get like Julius Randle at the 5? Austin, is that kind of where you're leaning a little bit?
Yeah, well, the nice thing about Minnesota is they have options, right? You can kind of mix and match. I do think it'll be Dante ahead of Nikhil, and I think it will be Dante at the expense of Gobert. But like, if it's Dante, sort of, if Jaden gets into foul trouble, that's another. As you guys mentioned, like, Jaden hasn't really seen much foul trouble this series. Like, that's another path for Dante to get a lot of minutes. Or if they do cut down Conley, that's another path. Like, there's just so many paths here for Dante to get big minutes. And then one note I wanted to make is that even though I think it'll be Dante over Nikhil, and like Dante's a better offensive fit versus OKC than Nikhil, there's this narrative that might be true around the league that Nikhil can guard his cousin. And I think like, the Pelicans, I think, leaned into that at some point. Like, I think we could really see Nikhil being the Shea stopper, or like, I've guarded him since I was a kid. And like, Nikhil's not a zero on offense. He's probably a little worse than you'd want among the other guys. But like, I could see a lot of Nikhil on Shea specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's good. The Jaden foul trouble thing we talked about it last week. That's like such a big deal, him and Randall. But think anything you want to add on the back end rotation guys and like how the push and pull works for Dante, Rudy, etc.?
Yeah, I think we're going to see my guess is we'll see Rudy de-emphasized. I think it'll be like Naz Reid, also very quick trigger, so fits the prototype that Austin's talking about in terms of how to attack OKC's defense. I think you might see some Julius at the 5 during the course of the series. I think Finch will experiment with that some. I just think they need to play more 5 out just generally. I think it's their best path to, like, I don't think you're going to dominate the boards enough, and I don't think Gobert is going to create enough space with his screening, even if they went back to that it really gets you that much. Because honestly, like, OKC is so good at pinching in and recovering, and like, I don't think you really pick that much up. So I'm expecting Gobert to be a little bit de-emphasized. I think that will first come at the benefit of Naz Reid, but I think you'll also see Dante DiVincenzo and Nikhil Alexander-Walker benefit from that as well. I think in general, there'll be smaller, more guard-heavy kind of lineups out there for Minnesota. Smaller for Minnesota. They're still like relatively big, outside of like the 5 spots specifically, because as Austin alluded to, like, Ant's big, Jaden's big. Nikhil and Dante are like above average 2 guard sizes as well. So like, I think that's going to be the approach. We'll see. I don't expect to see the surprises. Like, Jalen Clark would be the first name that I'd call, but I don't expect to see those types of surprises this series. I think that's more foul trouble, desperation type situations. And the one thing I'll note on this is it will be interesting. I think this is the only opponent in the league that Minnesota might question whether they want a swallowed whistle against. Because just generally, like, we know Minnesota has benefited from kind of playoff officiating where they call less fouls and different things because they're so aggressive defensively, and they're basically, OKC takes the same mantra though, like, they can't call them all. So I'm very interested to see how this series is officiated, because it will be a very physical, aggressive series with a lot of swiping, a lot of bumping. And I know for Minnesota, they would probably think that they'd like it called very loosely generally, or very tightly, I guess I should say, in terms of the whistle not being called, because that'll keep Shea off the free throw line. But I wonder how disruptive it would be to Minnesota's offense if OKC is allowed to be very, very physical on the whole. So yeah, I think in general, Minnesota, while they have a lot of different iterations within their 8, I don't expect them to expand beyond 8. And I think if Gobert is really stuck at 25, 28 minutes, something like that, then the combinations start to dwindle a little bit. It starts to become more of a 7 3/4 instead of an 8. And I think we might get to that point with Minnesota this series.
And then kind of wrapping it up, we talked a little bit about ways. So basically our thesis here on how we could get edge on betting is kind of betting against Rudy, which all 3 of us pretty much agree with. So Austin, we were talking a little bit before we hopped on. What were you kind of looking to kind of bet into on that situation with kind of betting against Rudy for series leaders bets?
Yeah, nothing that I love, but a couple things that I think have a little bit of value. One of them would be Dante threes leaders. I believe he's 12-1 right now on FanDuel and Caesars. Just sort of what we talked about, more minutes and sort of like a good funnel, good shot to break down this defense. Ant is the heavy favorite here at minus 250. He does have the pull-up 3, but he's going to spend a lot of time on ball. And sort of they're going to give him a lot of on-ball pressure, and he's just going to be the focus of the defense. So it will kind of have to be a lot of pull-up 3s, or Conley or Randall would have to have the ball for him to get the catch and shoot stuff. And then as far as a direct Rudy fade, I think Julius Randle, rebounds leader, has some interest for me. Let me check prices right now. He is 30-1 on FanDuel and 28-1 on Caesars. Not an empty the bank account kind of bet, just a sprinkle that, he's been playing a ton of minutes. And he does offensive foul, but Randall's not a big turnover forcer, not a big get into foul trouble himself kind of guy. I think some combination of less Rudy and some of their other guys getting in foul trouble, we could easily see Randall averaging 40 minutes a game this series. I think he was somewhat close to it in last year. He was playing a ton of minutes last series. So just a combination of bulk. Maybe if the OKC plays big, he'll have some matchups he could offensive rebound against, and then some at the 5 lineups. So I think those are the 2 that have a little bit of interest to me.
Yeah, I really like the Randall one. Think anything you want to add?
Yeah, just similarly, I think if the idea is just to attack Gobert directly, him at minus 160 to lead in rebounds, I think is probably overpriced. I think it would be overpriced if I felt like Rudy had pretty full minutes, just because I think Chet and Hartenstein are pretty competitive there, and I would expect with OKC being such huge favorites in the series that they would be in more position to grab more defensive rebounds and uncontested rebound situations as a whole. So I think OKC is getting hit down a little bit in part because Shea's had this huge bump in rebounding in the playoffs, but Hartenstein and Chet would be the name that I'd be looking at. He's only plus 250, so it's pretty borderline whether I'm going to play that. And he's plus 220 on FanDuel, plus 250 on C's, plus 220 on FanDuel. So that's I think Randall at a longer shot is probably better. But in general, trying to bet against Rudy in this series is going to be my approach.
Yeah, and I think Naz Reid threes is interesting on that aspect too. I think that's 8-1. Yeah. So I kind of like that. And then I think Chet's good. We saw it in Game 7. You want to play Caruso against Randall. They clearly want to push down Hartenstein over Chet. They like Chet for his two-way aspects. So yeah, pretty much all there. So yeah, where are we at for series here? Austin, sounds like we're all leaning OKC. I think it sounds like you may be more on the Wolves than us, but I'm curious where you're at, Austin, up for series pick.
Yeah, I have enough exposure on Wolves futures that I'm not going to bet this, but I do think the Wolves have very, very slight value here. And we have seen the line come down a bit since open, nothing crazy. And I kind of agree with what the market's done for this. Just OKC is a heavy favorite, but maybe opening not way off, but maybe slightly steep towards OKC. They also really had to exert themselves in the last series, but they have at least a day or two of rest. But I think Minnesota is good matchup wise and sort of Finch's sharp adjustment wise that I think you would give a little bit to Minnesota. So a long-winded way of saying I slightly lean Minnesota at the current price, but I think the market is kind of shaping it into place, and I don't really expect before game one tip off for it to like go crazy more or to get hit back towards OKC. So I'm gonna say official prediction is OKC. I'm gonna say either 6 or 7. You know what? I'll say OKC and 7.
Nice. I thought that's where I thought you were going there. So, Dink, you're probably more 5-6. That's kind of where I'm at. But where you at with it?
No, I'm in agreement with Austin that I felt like
Okay.
plus 300 is just a little bit stretched for what I would have expected for Minnesota in the spot. I was thinking it would be more like plus 260, plus 270, something like that. I know it's there on Caesars at plus 270 now. It's still plus 300 on FanDuel as we're recording. I don't think I'm going to end up betting this series. But I feel similarly that I'm feeling like OKC 6 or 7, and because I'm feeling 6 or 7, like plus 300 feels like not that far away. But I will go official prediction. I will go OKC and 6.
Yep. That's where I'm at. I'm between 5 and 6. I think if I wanted to play it, and I'm writing matchups now, and I don't know, man. I don't know if they can take care of the ball. I think that's going to really hurt them. And like I said, right from the top, that hurts them twofold so badly. So I don't know. I guess I'll go OKC and 6. I think I'm debating betting like the -1.5 games at like -160. I think that's how I'm might do it. I haven't done it yet. We've talked about this for years. Like it's so hard to bet on or against the Wolves because they could look like the best team in the NBA and then look like the worst team in the NBA all the time. So yeah, but really exciting stuff. Let's go to the Eastern Conference and talk about good God, man, the Pacers just mauling everyone. Impressive win to just thump the Cavs, and then the Knicks too. We talked about the blowout off the top. I mean, that was really impressive stuff here. I think the most interesting thing to me is how Indiana matches up. We saw Nesmith later in the series last year go on Brunson, but now they didn't have Cat, obviously. So I think do they put who's guarding Cat, who's guarding Brunson? I think that's really a big I'm really that's like when the game tips off, like that's the first thing we're gonna look at. So Austin, how do they kind of play the matchups in your opinion? Obviously, it's been a mixed bag, but what's gonna be their go-to stuff early in the series?
Drew mentioned this off air. I think I agree that they're going to start Siakam on Cat. Sort of like that lateral mobility and sort of like just he can hold up on post ups in general. He's a strong 4. Makes a lot of sense to me. Also, like early in Siakam's career, he was kind of a defensive stopper before he took on more offensive responsibilities. And like if you really do have Halliburton and Nembhard and McConnell playing the way that they have, then you can afford to let Siakam exert more energy on the defensive end. So I do think Siakam on Cat to start, and then Nembhard on Brunson to start. But at some point, Brunson is going to cook this Indiana defense, and then they're going to switch to Nesmith. And then I think by the end of the series, we're going to see sort of rotating bodies just show him different looks and coverages and different individual defenders. And I feel pretty decently that's how they're going to guard Brunson.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit more into Nesmith guarding him. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, he's the kind of defender that gives him problems. We saw Drew Holiday give, I'm talking about Cat, give Drew Holiday give him an issue. Tatum guarded really well. I don't know. I think that's a little bit more on the table. And I think Nesmith being, such a strong defender for his size, I think adds some value. So I'm not as sure as you guys are. But then again, the Nesmith on Brunson stuff was really effective. So they might still want to lean into that a little bit. And then let kind of Nembhard roam around, and then also that kind of allows you to put, so Austin, do you think he guards Mikal then Nesmith, or it's I don't know. I'm not really sure to put it that way, but where do you think?
I was actually leaning Nesmith starting on OG just because like Mikal's not a strength based type of player. Someone on the Knicks is going to get a nice matchup unless you go Halliburton on Hart. But they also, a lot of teams like to go like their center on Hart. So you could I don't know how they could go Miles on Hart, they could go Halliburton on Hart. But I do think Mikal will have potentially an interesting matchup here because if I'm Carlisle and I'm starting Nembhard on Brunson, then I'm probably putting Nesmith on OG just because OG is much more of a strength-based driver and like Nesmith is really strong for his size. Whereas Mikal hasn't been very good this playoffs, right? Like you kind of have to see it first, like first one's free kind of thing. So yeah, I also don't know exactly how the matchup's going to work. But that's kind of my first thing.
Yeah. Dink, do you have any strong inclination on how this goes matchup wise?
I'm with Austin, very, very, very strongly aligned. So I think Turner on Hart. I think Siakam on Cat. I think Nembhard starts on Brunson. I think they protect Neesmith. Like, I think one of the things that you don't necessarily want to start is Nembhard on Brunson, Neesmith on Cat, and then you're vulnerable to your two best defenders that can play offense in foul trouble guarding their two strongest players. I think you want to have like one kind of in break glass in case of emergency with Neesmith, and he's the guy who's more prone to fouls. So I think start Nembhard, maybe get to the fourth quarter stuff. You have Neesmith on Brunson in those situations. But like try to protect him from foul trouble early in the game would be kind of my assumption. So Neesmith on OG, I think makes sense there. Than Halliburton on McHale. McHale's had success in the minutes that Brunson's been off the floor at the start of the fourth quarter. That's where he's really had success offensively. Those are minutes where you can get back to having, a Nembhard or a Neesmith on McHale in those spots because Brunson's not on the floor. So in the spots that Brunson and Cat are on the floor, if you're going to make or try to force New York into matchup hunting and trying to make them like try to isolate McHale versus Halliburton in minutes when Brunson and Cat are on the floor, like I'm pretty good with that if I'm Rick Carlisle. So I think that's the approach that I'd be taking from Indiana's perspective defensively.
Yeah, and then on the other side, matchups wise, pretty straightforward. Actually, it's not straightforward. Do you think that it would be? We saw OG guard Cade. Do you think it's? I think it's McHale. I feel pretty strongly that way. You could still have OG for the Siakam matchup. How do you feel about that, Austin? I feel pretty strongly about that.
Yeah. I think OG is the best defender on either side in this series, but I think McHale is really good at navigating screens and like where he lacks in strength, he makes up for in length and just maneuverability in tight spaces, and that's like Halliburton's not going to, take McHale down in the post. Like I think McHale's a really good defender for Halliburton, especially like the length is really going to bother him. So I think I feel pretty strongly able to start McHale on Halliburton. And like, I think McHale's defense has come down a bit from his Phoenix days, but it's really hard to see Halliburton taking him one-on-one and abusing him in a way that would force a switch. So I like McHale and Halliburton. And then I think it's OG on Siakam, although I think Hart is also a decent idea for Siakam just because Hart's so good on post-ups. And like, I actually think Hart isn't the most laterally quick, whereas, and so like kind of having him guard up, I think makes a lot of sense here. So the thing they could try at some point too is Cat on Neesmith and then letting everyone else guard up. But I think we're going to start with McHale on Halliburton and then OG on Siakam is probably where I think it'll start.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that if they put Cat on Turner, that's going to put Turner in probably a lot of action. I think they want to get that action going. We saw Cat really struggle with playing up and pick and roll coverages, especially in the Detroit series against Cade. So I think that could be like a big pressure point for how the Pacers are attacking. So I think that's going to be a big one. So I think this could be like a pretty big Miles Turner series here. Dink, do you have any thoughts on anything you want to add on? I think we're all in agreement here, but anything you thought on matchups and who on Indiana besides Halliburton, like no duh, but besides Halliburton, who else could kind of like carry a bigger offensive load?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you're going to have Brunson on Nembhard, I think they're going to try to attack that matchup as well, which is the matchup that I would expect them to get. So I think you're going to see Nembhard trying to make Brunson work. Now, Brunson held up pretty well defensively in the series against Boston. He really competed on that end, and he doesn't have a huge size disadvantage against Nembhard. So I think that's going to be a place that they try to attack. I agree with you that OG probably starts on Siakam. I think that also involves him in a lot of the screen action as well, which is what New York would like to do, right? Like take away some of the Halliburton, Siakam pick and pop stuff and pick and roll stuff, and some of the switch stuff that would be so appetizing that they like to use. They like to use Siakam in those get a switch and then have Siakam post up. Well, if it's Bridges and OG, I don't think you're going to be attacking that stuff as quite as much. So I think you're going to get more into the Turner and Halliburton pick and pop stuff that you alluded to. Maybe that's different if they do hide Cat on Neesmith and then have Hart on Turner, and then like force Miles Turner to prove his merit on posting and finishing down low, because it's not really been the strength of his game historically. He's been very good in the playoffs though. But yeah, I think the way that you guys talked through that makes perfect sense to me, and I think in terms of good matchups for Indiana offensively, I think, with the starting assignments, the way that they look, I think you're going to be looking at, I'm interested to see how much they put the ball in Nembhard's hands and try to attack Brunson.
Yeah, we saw that early in the series.
Sorry, can we briefly give flowers to OG Anunoby for his defensive impact last series? I know we didn't recap Boston, New York, but he was incredible. Absolutely game-changing on defense for the entire second half of that series. I just want to mention, you have your defenders that are really good on ball, and you have your defenders that are really good off ball, and then you have guys like Caruso and OG that are so rare that can lock down their defender and create so much havoc off ball. And then OG also had some weak side shot blocking that series too. Just wanted to mention because we didn't recap it. OG was so good.
That's why I was so surprised by in Game 5 that I thought Jaylen Brown played with comfort the whole game, and that was surprising to me. That's what I talked about going in, that the first few minutes I'm expecting more defensive intensity from OG. I ended up my at the game ladder bet was OG steals. So only hit the 2+, didn't hit the 3+. But I just felt he's a mismatch as a defensive advantage over Jaylen Brown, someone with a weaker handle. And, that could come into play at times too with Siakam. Siakam's handle can get a little loose at times too on a creation standpoint. So I'm interested to see how that plays out.
Yeah, pulling back on that, I mean, how good are the defenders? Nembhard, Jaden McDaniels, Dort, Caruso. It's got such good defenders for these conference finals here. But yeah, anything scheme wise, as far as maybe the Knicks getting more 3-pointers, we saw that was kind of tamped down a little bit. How do you think the shot distribution works, Austin? For we've seen Indy at times be a little bit more vulnerable inside, and then also tied into that, how much Mitch did we get? We saw Mitch make a huge impact in the last series against what could be a smaller second unit. We'll talk about that in a second if it's Thomas Bryant, Obi, yada yada. But overall shot distribution, do you think this is going to be more of an interior or more of a 3-point shooting series for the Knicks offense?
I think it's going to be interior. I think we did talk that Indiana has shown more willingness to bend but their inclination is still to take away the 3-pointers. Yep. And whereas we said the Brunson Cat pick and pop might be the only way to beat Boston, a Brunson Cat pick and roll is just perfectly made for beating Indiana. This is they should be abusing that, I think. Also we mentioned it wasn't a great matchup for sort of what Mitchell Robinson's strengths are versus Boston. He was just really good at what he did do versus he was just really good defensively. I think this is actually a great matchup, Indiana for Mitchell Robinson. Just the Indiana doesn't have the personnel that could possibly stop him on the boards. And they say that in the playoffs, your biggest weakness is exposed. Indiana's weakness throughout has always been interior and just size and offensive rebounding or limiting offensive rebounding and just sort of matching physicality of the other team. Mitch Robinson could wreak havoc in his minutes. And sort of he's gained the trust of Tibbs, which is kind of 3/4 of the battle for getting minutes on the Knicks. So I think it could be a big Mitch Robinson series.
Yeah, and then so how much are we getting? Dink, do you think we're going to get more than the Boston series? And then or do you think it's going to be kind of we talked about this in the last series? Do they just start 7 again and not bring in campaign? Do you think they kind of loosen it up like we were saying earlier?
No, I think they loosen it up. I think that's just the nature of all series. I think loosening it up. I actually I'm more pro Indiana this series than you guys are. But I think it'll be about the same, maybe even a little less, Mitch. My concern for Mitch, I think it's a great matchup if the game is played in the half court. My concern for Mitch is that the series might be too fast for him. So the pace of the series is really going to impact how much Mitch is able to be out there. Because if Indiana is able to play fast and play really quickly and get into sets really quickly, I think that could be a problem for Mitch, both from a conditioning perspective and from his ability to kind of impact things, because his best impacts defensively are at the rim. And the Pacers are fine to just get the ball around the perimeter and shoot a bunch and spread you out with Obi Toppin at the 5 and different things like that. So I think it could be a very volatile series for Mitchell Robinson, where he's either super impactful, dominating on the offensive boards, forcing Indiana to combat and try to play bigger, or it could be a series where he's just behind the play often and just kind of running wind sprints back and forth as the play is happening. He's not super impactful, and I think that could be working in Indiana's favor. So I think it's going to be I think he was very effective in Boston's series. I thought it was a worse matchup for him to be very effective against Boston, but I thought he was more necessary because they didn't have as many options to kind of pull I think they have more options to pull here, so I don't think he's as necessary, but it's a better matchup for him to be successful. But I think there's volatility associated with that. And if the series plays quick and the Pacers are able to play in transition, I think that's a really bad thing for Mitch.
And does Carlisle do hack a Mitch? We've seen him do it in the past, not as I would say not as aggressive as Joe Mazzulla. But I was looking back in 2022. The Jakob Pertl hack a game way back. He had 21 free throws. I remember that one.
I think if, and look, the Knicks are really good at taking away transition stuff just generally. So like that's the Knicks' strength. And Tom Thibodeau defenses have always been very good at that. If the game is not able to play fast and they are not able to expose Mitch that way, I would not be surprised for Carlisle to go at that solution. But I think that's going to be like, if we can't get Mitch uncomfortable by playing fast offensively, then yeah, we might need to slow down the game. But I don't think they're going to try to do that from the start, because every time you put Mitch at the line, you're allowing Knicks to set their defense. And I think the whole thing that Indiana wants to get you is uncomfortable. Indiana's whole approach is, we're going to press you defensively, we're going to try to speed you up, and then offensively, we're going to go so fast with our decisions, we might not be playing like pace in terms of like getting the ball, getting a shot quickly, but we're going to go so fast with our decisions and our passes that we're going to make you uncomfortable. And so I think if the game is like too fast for Mitch, I don't think you'll see the hack of strategy, because I think Carlisle will trust his team to execute. But I think if the Knicks are able to slow Indiana down and make the game more of a grind, I think you could see that as an emergency solution for Carlisle trying to get Mitch off the floor. Because I imagine in those situations, he'd be very successful.
Yeah, and just
one thing.
Indiana pace.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to respond. I agree with Drew. This is not me disagreeing. This is just a devil's advocate thing, because I actually agree with him about the transition stuff. But with Boston, I was a little surprised they were hacking Mitch, because A, he was an improved free throw shooter this season, and B, I'm not sure that the Mitch career points per possession off of his career free throw percentage is that much better of an option than just guarding the Knicks with the Celtics defense. Whereas here, the trade-off's much different, because the Knicks will probably be much more effective versus Indiana. So I agree with the set defense, and I agree with the transition. The counter argument would be that replacing a Knicks offensive possession versus the Pacers with Mitch Robinson free throws is a much more tasty trade-off than it is with Boston guarding a Knicks offensive possession.
Yeah, I just think all the hack of stuff generally happens out of fear and out of desperation with coaches. I could do a whole podcast on Mazzulla's hack of strategy, because I think he did it at all of the wrong times. And I cannot believe that he did not go to it in game 4. That was shocking to me when the Knicks offense was really, really crushing, that he just abandoned the hack of strategy on Mitchell Robinson at that point when Jalen was in his bag. But yeah, I agree with you, Austin, that just generally it's a more appetizing solution, given you would expect Indiana to struggle a little bit more than let's say, if you want to give credit to Mitch's career free throw rate, we're talking about 1.04 points per possession. If you want to give more credence to the playoff rate, we're talking about somewhere between 0.9 and 1.05 or 1.1 is where we're at. I would expect New York to probably be closer to the top end of that range. So yeah, I think it would be a more appetizing situation. It's just a matter of what it gets you on the other side of the ball. I think that's part of the equation that's not often talked about, is the hack of strategy. Yeah, it can help disrupt the rhythm of an offense, and it can maybe get you back into games by stopping the clock and having possessions force quicker and different things. But you're also going against a set defense a lot on the other end, and that can be challenging to kind of get those easy buckets against. Now, Indiana is so good at attacking set defenses because they go so fast anyway. But I think that's ultimately where a lot of this series will be determined, in my opinion, by how well New York can defend Indiana's quick pace in the half court. I think that's the whole series for me, is if Indiana has a above average defensive series, I think they're very, very live in this matchup. But if they struggle defensively, I don't see them pulling out the series.
Yeah, that's what I was jumping in on when Austin and I were fighting who's going to talk next. The Pacers have 337 passes per game. The Warriors have 314. Next one down is 281. The Pacers pass the ball so much. But I think that kind of helps the Knicks, right? They've got a lot of length. They've got some strong wing defense. They're pretty good switchable as well. So I think the wings defense is going to be important. We talked about Mikal, talked about Miles Turner a little bit. But Austin, do you think anybody besides is it just going to be, is it Cat bounce back? Is Mikal going to be able to exploit the matchup? Who on the Knicks do you think could kind of take a step forward in this series?
I think it's Cat. Yeah, it's kind of a boring answer, but I think it's Brunson and Cat. Like for all of the reasons that Indiana defends, and then on top of that, like playoff usage generally funnels more towards the high usage guys, unless the other team specifically takes it away. And I'm not sure Indiana is going to take it away that much, especially early on. Um, so yeah, it just doesn't seem, and like the stuff that Indiana gives up isn't really the stuff that McHale gets anyways, right? Like McHale's not getting to the rim a lot. They're not going to help off him a ton. Like I I think McHale's his value is going to come more on the defensive end and sort of like being the guy that can play 42 minutes. So yeah, I think I'll save more thoughts for when we do our series predictions, but like I think it's just going to be Brunson Cat.
Yep. I pretty much agree. I think Mikkel could be interesting. I think if Mikkel has a big series, it could be kind of short, honestly. But Cat has to have a big series. I think if Cat has a bad series, that's like really big trouble. So I'm basically in agreement. I just think Mikkel could be a really key part if the Knicks kind of are hitting all cylinders. Think where you at with Knicks kind of X factors / playing above expectation.
Generally in agreement, but McHale would be my third in line just because I think he's going to get Halliburton the most. And so that's like, and McHale is a good individual, like kind of isolation mid-range scorer. So I think he would be next in line. But yeah, in agreement that like this is Cat. I think this series is largely hinges like if Cat is playing well and effectively, I don't see how Indiana slows down New York's offense. And if they can't slow down New York's offense, they're going to have to shoot the ball really, really well. If Cat doesn't play well, I think Indiana is in really good shape if Cat doesn't play well this series. So I think a lot of the hopes of the Knicks advancing to the finals is on Cat's shoulders.
And then lastly, we don't really need to talk Knicks depth, but we do need to talk Indiana depth. How much Thomas Bryant do we see? How much Ben Mathurin, Nesmith overlap do we see? Do we see a good bet at Obi Toppin? Does he play center against Mitch? That sounds terrible. So how do you see the TJ McConnell? Like Austin, how do you see the bench minutes kind of being shook out here? And how much do we get? Do we get like a deeper rotation, or does it kind of tighten up?
I keep going back and forth on. You mentioned off air that like Indiana got tighter as the series went on last time in a way that we haven't really seen from them at all during the playoffs. But I still generally am of the mindset that Drew said, where it's like beginning of a new series, you're gonna A, so that you don't burn out your guys for the series, but also B, so you can see how these players look against the other team. So I do think we're going to open up the matchup, and then I think one thing worth noting is like Cat not only should be good for the Knicks offense, but has to be, because this is a really bad defensive matchup for Cat. Like he's going to give so much back on the other end, and like Tibbs has shown a willingness to go to Mitch over Cat for an important like defensive lineup or like units. Like he, for the first time I can remember with Cat, and maybe like with any sort of dominant big that Tibbs had, he was willing to go away from Cat for closing minutes, or the hockey like the switches for offense defense. Like Tibbs did that in a way we had never seen from him before, where like a lot of lineups out there in the Boston series where Cat was not a part of with 2 minutes left in the game. So and that kind of bleeds into your question with like what does Indiana do, right? Because Carlisle is very, very sharp and very reactionary. Like he's gonna, if Cat's out there, there might be a different set of personnel than if Mitchell Robinson's out there. Like you can't really go small. You might need a Thomas Bryant or someone to just match up with, with Mitchell Robinson. Whereas like you can afford, if Cat's at the 5 with 4 out or 5 out, you might be able to run more Obi Toppin, more four smalls. And yeah, so I guess my answer for Indiana is kind of, I don't know yet, and I'm not sure that it's set in stone either. It might depend on what the Knicks are doing.
I think my stance is I don't think Jarris plays. I think Jarris is kind of a bad matchup with that heavy pick and roll game they're going to see. I think TJ is going to get not much overlap because the bigger wings and all that. I think Thomas Bryant gets pretty good minutes early, and I don't know how much Mathurin plays. Like obviously he's going to play, but I could see it being like where he's just playing the full 48, like we saw at times in the first round, but we saw a little bit more of the overlap in the middle of the Cleveland series. I could see that getting cut down a little bit. So I think Mathurin can get pushed down. I think Obi's like kind of the same where we've been. Overall, but think any thoughts on what I just added there with and what Austin said too?
Yeah, some agreement, some surprise. I was surprised you don't think Jarris will play because you're usually the Jarris guy. I could see Jarris being like a break glass in case of emergency. Like I think a lot of this depends on if Nesmith and Nembhard are able to stay out of foul trouble. Because I could see scenarios where if like Neesmith is in a bunch of foul trouble, it might be Jarris instead of Matherin like getting elevated a bunch just because they choose to have like another defender out there as kind of a priority. It's interesting because Indiana has generated so much of an advantage through the playoffs with their bench unit. And I think a lot of times their bench unit is just really able to take advantage by creating really good looks against kind of weaker backup centers. That's obviously not the case with the Knicks from a defensive standpoint with Mitchell Robinson. So like you think of all the stuff that Benedict Mathurin and TJ McConnell, when they're at their best, are getting, it's in the restricted area. And that's stuff that Mitchell Robinson funnels you away from. He does not allow that stuff. So I think that's one of the biggest edges that the Knicks have in this series, which is shocking when you like look at these two teams just generally. You would think Indiana has such a huge advantage from a bench perspective, but I think one of the advantages that the Knicks have is their best primary bench defender takes away a lot of the stuff. If you can get Indiana into the half court, a lot of the stuff that Indiana really likes to attack in that second unit. So yeah, I'm with you that I think you could see Matherin a little bit de-emphasized for Neesmith if Neesmith is able to stay out of that foul trouble. And I could see if Neesmith and Nembhard are struggling to stay out of foul trouble, you get Jarris as kind of like an emergency option. I think there will be some experimentation with like Obi at the 5 against Mitch just to see if you can stretch him out and get him really uncomfortable and then just get open threes and essentially be like, okay, we're going to try to, team rebound on the other end, which would help Mitch in terms of like preventing fast break and transition stuff. But we're going to try a team rebound on the other end with a smaller unit and then grab and go. I'm interested in all of that because I think Carlisle has options at his disposal to kind of mess around with and try to play with. Like Thomas Bryant is the best one because he can stretch the floor and not give up the size on the other end against Mitchell Robinson. But Obi can play very fast. So I think those are interesting options to try to combat the havoc that Mitchell Robinson's going to wreak both on the offensive boards and on the defensive side in terms of deterring Indiana from getting into the paint, which is where Indiana in the second unit really has their successes when TJ McConnell, and again, Deuce McBride also, I think this will be an important series for Deuce McBride to be able to stay in front of TJ McConnell and try to keep TJ out of the lane, because I think that's where a lot of the second unit success offensively for Indiana comes from, is when TJ McConnell is breaking down his man off the dribble and then getting you into rotation on the other end. And so I think, the Knicks are like pretty uniquely structured to defend some of that stuff that Indiana's had so much success with against second units in the playoffs so far.
And then going back to the question we talked about with the Knicks with Cat, and Mikal, is there anybody on Indiana that you think, like, if Indiana wins this series, this person's like, oh my God, this person dominated, kind of like a la Aaron Gordon against the Clippers? We didn't even talk about how Aaron Gordon played in Game 7 yet. Yeah. We can talk about that next. But is there anybody on Indiana you think that, like, could swing the series? I kind of think it's Miles Turner. I think if Miles Turner has a big series, I think that could be really, really trouble for the Knicks, on top of the defense, making Cat look really bad. So we're kind of like making the same bet on different sides. But I kind of think it's Miles Turner. What do you think, Austin?
Bummer. I was also going to say Miles Turner. I don't have any. Independently, yeah. I think it'll be Miles Turner. To answer your previous question, one thing I didn't mention is I think we could see some Ben Shepherd this series. Yep. It's not an if, but a when one of Nembhard or Neesmith gets in foul trouble. Carlisle loves Shepherd's on-ball defense on guards and wings. So I think Jarris could be a Cat defender as a backup if there's foul trouble there. And then I think that Shepherd will be a Brunson defender. Like Shepherd's, if he does come in this series, almost all of his minutes will be guarding Jalen Brunson, in my opinion.
And then, Dink, do you have anything you want? Are you also Team Miles Turner?
I think Turner's the appropriate answer, but I'd say Nembhard. If like Nembhard has like one of these series where he is just like really making things hard on the other end for Brunson, like my biggest concerns for Indiana are, I think they're going to need to be very efficient offensively to hold up, because I think they're going to struggle defensively. So I think they're going to have to be very efficient offensively, and I think their best path to doing that, obviously they shot the 3 ball very, very well, but in terms of like generating easier offense, I think it's through the Turner pick and pop stuff, and then I think it's through Nembhard kind of attacking Brunson. I think those are their 2 easier paths to efficient offense with the starters.
And then anything we want to do for bets? Just talking through this, it sounds like we should take a shot on like Miles Turner threes leader at 10-1. Any thoughts on series leaders bets, Austin, that you like?
Sorry to be disappointing. I didn't see anything that I like enough to mention on the show.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really. I think Miles Turner 3's leader is interesting at 10-1. But I think honestly, I think I'm probably going to play some Siakam unders. I just think that they're going to lean more into the Miles Turner 2-man game with Halliburton. So I think that's probably an interesting way to play it. Not series leaders, but Dink, do you have any thoughts on maybe being a tougher series for Siakam? We haven't talked about Halliburton that much, which is pretty insane. But anything you would just add on Halliburton and Siakam?
No, it's just I was looking at the series leader stuff, and I think like some of the stuff I had written down, which I didn't bet anything, but that I'd written down as potentials, has already like moved pretty wildly. Because I thought maybe I'm crazy. I thought I saw Siakam at 100-1 to be series rebound leader, and he's down to 30-1 now on Caesars. Which 30-1 is not that interesting to me. And Mitchell Robinson was 45-1, I think, and is now at 35-1 as the rebound leader. I thought Cat was a little bit too heavily favored there at -900, just because of Cat having like a banged up finger already, like has had a history of like injury issues this year. These kind of had to play through. But yeah, there's not much that I'd bet currently. Turner at 10-1 for threes is like probably the right number. So I don't have a lot there.
I still see Mitchell at 42-1 on
FanDuel.
Yeah.
Okay. So FanDuel's got some better prices there that are a little bit more interesting. That's probably the closest I'd have to a bet. The 35-1 I don't really like on Caesars. But yeah, there's not a lot here. And Cat is a little bit lighter on FanDuel at -650. But yeah, Siakam's 42-1 there too. Those are interesting. I don't think Turner. I'm not interested in taking shots on Turner, and I'm not really interested in taking shots on the wings. So it's like maybe Mitch, maybe Siakam, and then assist stuff. I don't really have any interest in. I think Halliburton is a pretty strong favorite there. Yeah, so I don't really have much from a serious prop betting side on Indiana or New York.
I mean, is -280 like not bad for Halliburton? Like that's he's
it's not.
You know? So I don't know. I think that's actually kind of good. I'd hate to be a chalk donkey, but I mean he has to win that, right? So
yeah, I don't see. I mean, especially with the way that Indiana doesn't really help a ton. It would be a surprise to me if Halliburton did not lead there.
Yeah, I might dunk off a little bit there. Okay, so we could get the series picks here. It sounds like we're all kind of in agreement here. But yeah, I'll go Dink first. Where you at for series pick?
I had mentioned on the last podcast that I thought Indiana could provide trouble for the Knicks. I think one of the things that maybe I'm leaning too heavily into this idea, but I remember last year, obviously, like Minnesota had climbed this big mountain of Denver in a 7-game series, like taking them down. And then they started the series against Dallas just a little bit flat, got into some competitive games, kind of lost some close games, and then things kind of snowballed against them in that series. And I could see some similarities here in terms of like the Knicks have been spending the last like 2 years of building this team with the idea of taking down Boston. How do we beat Boston? How do we beat Boston? And then all of a sudden, here's this Pacers team who's very well rested, been a machine during the playoffs, playing really well, is going to change the tempo on you from what Boston was doing like really quickly. Like one of the things we were talking about with Boston is we were getting a little bit ISO happy. It was like playing into some comfort levels for New York defensively. And Indiana's going to change all that. And so I would not be surprised to see Indiana come out playing well in the series. And if they come out playing well in game one and steal game one, then I think this is for sure a long series is kind of the way that I'm thinking through this. So official pick, I'll stick with, picking against Indiana and picking with my now homer New York Knicks, but I'll go Knicks in 7. But I was hoping to get a little bit better number than this on Indiana. They're right now at +130. I know you got in on this a little bit earlier when the price was a little bit more shaded towards Indiana, but we're more on the Knicks side. But I was hoping to see like a +160, +180 for Indiana, and I was going to be kind of interested in that stuff. I'm not betting this series at where it is currently.
Yeah, I got in at Knicks minus 135. I'll go Knicks. I think Knicks in 7. I think it could be Knicks in 6, maybe. But I think I don't know. And then just to pull back too, man. I mean, this team has had the goods. Like when the chips are down, man. They've had so many games where it's like, oh man, they did it again. Really impressive. I really like the way they closed out the Celtics as well. So, and I think Austin's a little bit more on the Knicks. He mentioned it on the last pod he was. So you gotta you can't pick Knicks in 7, Austin. If you're gonna one up us, you gotta one up us a little bit.
Yeah, so I am on Knicks series at minus 139, and I have Knicks in 6. But I will say I have some reservations and reasons that it could go longer that are actually maybe a little different than Drew. Um, One for me is just how fast Indiana plays and how many more players they can play. It could just wear down the Knicks over the course of the series. I'm actually not as concerned about the early series stuff. I'm more concerned later on. Um, and there are just a lot of outs here for Indiana. One being that their most valuable player in the last years has been whoever has the voodoo doll. Like they, if you're a Knicks player, it's like Final Destination. Like, how am I going to get hurt if I'm an important player? How am I going to get hurt against the Pacers this series? And that's why I thought Boston would roll through Indiana, because like there isn't a single player on Boston that would go down that would cripple their chances. But like, man, any of the starters go down for the Knicks, and their depth is just so short. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's also like if you're handicapping the talent of the two teams, everyone has elevated Indiana, and I still remain like kind of like an Indiana Bear. Like they have gotten so fortunate over the last 2 years. Like, yes, I've been wrong, and yes, they've gone farther than I've expected, but like they haven't seen the best of all these opponents. They got swept by the Celtics, the fully healthy Celtics last year, and every other team like has had some major injury, and that's continued this year too. Like if you look at the Knicks, look back for this last series, like the Celtics without Tatum are still really like the Knicks had to play really well to win that series.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not that we can't give credit to the Pacers, but like the team that they played with the Cavs is just not anywhere close to the regular season Cavs, anywhere close to the 1 seed Cavs. So I think when you're doing lookbacks, like I think the Knicks have more sort of credit for what they've done to this point. But I'm going sort of Knicks 6 or 7 just because of all the outs. But I think I wanted to talk about game 1. I actually bet Knicks minus 4, and I'll probably give that to the subs before this pod releases for a few reasons. One, I don't think there's a big series hangover effect as much as there might be because the rest is so long in between the Knicks winning game 6 and then this game starting game 1. There's plenty of rest here. You sort of have like a fully healthy Knicks before they have the chance to get hurt later on in the series. You just sort of have, they're not worn down by the pace, and they're not, everyone's healthy right now. And then also you have sort of the whole change of venue aspect where like home court is worth the most early on in the series for a bunch of reasons, right? It's like by game 6 or 7, the Garden is sort of where the Pacers and Knicks have spent equal amount of times flying and in the same city and stuff, same sight lines. Like this just seems kind of shocking to me that minus 4 is basically valuing them at neutral on a pick, or like pick them on neutral. And I think as we've talked about these matchup stuff, like a lot of the advantages we have kind of might shade Pacers over the course of a series, but I feel stronger that Knicks minus 4 is a good bet for game 1 than Knicks series is, and the price has moved on the series, so I am betting Knicks minus 4.
Yeah, I like that. That was really well laid out there. Think of anything you want to add, and I do want to talk about Aaron Gordon playing a little bit. That's freaking crazy, man. So, anything? Do you like? I thought that was awesome. I'm going to tell you on that, Austin. But anything you want to add there, and then we can kind of get Aaron Gordon really quick.
No, I mean, I think Austin's note about the voodoo doll is maybe the most interesting thing about a game.
We're assuming they get hurt. Like that's what
it's just like at some point Indiana has found a way to injure the opposing best player in game 1. Nobody's hurt yet, but yeah. On Aaron Gordon, the one note I want to make about Aaron Gordon, obviously like super heroic effort and whatnot, but I am more convinced than ever that Aaron Gordon, after watching Nikola Jokic for the last 4 or 5 years that they've been teammates together, figured out that he can play basketball without having to run hard or jump high because of watching Nikola Jokic. And he was like, you know what? I've seen enough of this guy who doesn't do any of the athletic things that you normally do, go out there and just dominate basketball games. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to go out here, not run super fast, not really sprint or anything like that. Just sort of jump when the ball is like closest to me. Otherwise, just not leave the floor. And I'm going to work my way through this game. I don't think if he had not watched Jokic up close for the last 4 or 5 years, that he would even have an idea of how to try to do any of the stuff that he did in that game. But yeah, heroic effort from Aaron Gordon.
Yeah, one of the coolest things I've seen. Too bad it was in a loss, and they got just smoked. Anything want to just add on that, Austin, for to wrap us up?
The only thing I want to add is this is a classic Drew Glaze to turn an Aaron Gordon heroic effort into Jokic praise.
100%. 100%. The man deserving of all the credit here is Aaron Gordon and Nikola Jokic. They deserve equal amounts of credit for Aaron Gordon's efforts in Game 7.
Yeah, they got Peyton Watson make a freaking layup, buddy. All right, I think we kind of wrap it up here. Dick, you could kind of take us out of here.
Yeah, as always, appreciate you guys tuning in. If you're catching this on our YouTube channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button and get notifications whenever we go live with new content. If you are catching up on this on iTunes or Spotify, consider leaving a rating and review. That helps circulate the podcast and get more ears on this. If you're interested in any of our premium content, you can go to establishedrun.com/subscribe-MBA for more premium product offerings and details on our prop side and on our DFS side. And of course, if you are into more basketball, more DFS, more betting, the W has started. The season kicked off on Friday. Establish the Run is offering full stat projections and DFS packages for WNBA this season. Off to a really good start. Really proud of the work that we're putting forward there. So great opening weekend of games. Was happy to see the scheduling work out really well with national TV games on days that the NBA didn't have games. Shout out to the W for nailing the scheduling early on. But we've got the Establish the WNBA product over on establishedrun.com that you can check out with the subscribe page. More details and information there as well.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it, getting in some W. So appreciate you guys listening. Catch you guys next time.